Hello and welcome to the March 20th, 2021 Saturday Walk and Talk afternoon edition of the Bobby Hesley Show. How's everybody doing? It's been a while since you've heard from your man, Bobby Hesley. Well, not a while, maybe a week. I think my last Walk and Talk was actually last Sunday. Tried to do a show earlier this week. Had a little bit of technical difficulties, but you know how we do it in Michigan. When it's 54 degrees outside, that's summer weather to us. So I had to get out, and I wanted you guys to join me on my afternoon walk. So let me get right into it. Before I do that, please like, comment, share this video. You're definitely going to want to share this video because I have a take on something that I think is going to be quite polarizing. I think it's going to, I don't know, rub a lot of people the wrong way, but it is what it is. That's always been the policy of the Bobby Hesley Show. You guys know that I will always be transparent with you about what I feel on a given topic. And this particular topic is no different. So let me get right to it. LGBT. I don't know what the alphabet combination is these days. I don't know if it's LGBTQ. I don't know if it's LGBTQIA. I've heard lots of different variations of it. So for simplicity's sake, we're just going to refer to it as the traditional LGBT. That sound good? Capiche? All right, let's start there. So lately, we've been seeing lots of different headlines regarding certain people in the trans movement taking over certain industries, taking over certain areas, whether it be women's sports, whether it be mixed martial arts, whether it be beauty pageants, which is the most recent headline regarding that. Lots of people are very outraged over that. But I believe that outrage that people have is misplaced. I don't believe that outrage should be directed towards those in the LGBT community. Now, this is going to come as a shock to many of you because you all know that I'm a conservative Catholic. You guys know where we stand on certain issues of sexuality. And this might come as a shock. But let me tell you why I stand where I stand. Now, I want us to rewind. To set the context for this, we need to hit the rewind button, and we need to go back about 50 years, maybe even a little longer. We'll call it 53 years. We need to go back 53 years in time to where it all started, in my opinion. Oftentimes, the LGBT community, I believe, gets wrongly blamed for a lot of things in America. For example, many on the conservative Christian right blames the gay community in particular about the breakdown of traditional marriage between one man and one woman. With the landmark Supreme Court case Obergefell versus Burgess that I believe was ruled, I want to say June 28th of 2015, about 6 years ago, lots of people on the Christian right were outraged over the fact that marriage was quote unquote redefined. That a bunch of people, a bunch of judges in Washington, D.C. had the power to redefine an ancient institution that's been the bedrock of most societies and civilizations since the beginning of time, which is the traditional conventional marriage between one man and one woman. Now, why do the gays get the blame for that? Why do the gays get the blame for invading women's sports and beauty pageants and all these other things that I've been talking about? I want to take you guys back to a case that is often overshadowed by the most landmark case to those of us on the right. We all know which case I'm talking about, Roe versus Wade. The Supreme Court case, January 20th or 21st of 1973, that legalized the brutal practice of abortion. That's usually the case that takes up most of our brain cells on the conservative right, and rightly so, because abortion is the greatest evil of our time. It is the greatest human and civil rights violation of our time. It is the greatest form of systemic racism of our time, because more black babies are murdered to the tune of 900 per day than any other form of black murder combined. However, there's a certain court case that came just 5 years before Roe versus Wade, that if it were not for this court case, there would be no Roe versus Wade. There would be no Roe versus Wade. In fact, Roe versus Wade is the descendant, is the offspring, is the offshoot and the result of this court case. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? I'll give you 5 seconds. By the way, guys, I don't know how strong my connection is, but hopefully strong enough to where I don't have technical difficulties like I had last time. The case that I'm talking about, that I believe is the case that set the tone for all of the cultural rot that we have been experiencing in this country for the last half century, is a little known case called Griswold versus Connecticut. I want you guys to look up that court case. It's called Griswold versus Connecticut. Now, what was Griswold versus Connecticut all about? Well, it was a court case back in 1968, I want to say, either in 68 or 63. Don't quote me on that. It was sometime in the mid to late 60s. Okay? It was called Griswold versus Connecticut. And here's what Griswold versus Connecticut did. Griswold versus Connecticut legalized artificial birth control between married couples. Okay? What if I were to tell you guys that there was a certain time in American jurisprudence and American law that it was actually illegal to practice artificial contraception, even between husbands and wives? Did you guys know that there was a time that that was against the law? It really was. Contraception, just like there was a time where abortion used to be illegal, there was a time where contraception was illegal. I kid you not. That all changed during the Griswold versus Connecticut court case. By the way, the people who were behind that Griswold versus Connecticut court case was Planned Parenthood of Connecticut. So of course, Margaret Sanger's fingerprints are all over that, just like her fingerprints are all over all the other kinds of eugenics and things that have gone on in this country. And essentially, Griswold versus Connecticut, in my opinion, that's what redefined marriage. It was not Obergefell versus Burgess back in 2015, when quote unquote same-sex marriage was legalized. That was not what redefined marriage, folks. I gotta say, the gays, the homosexuals, the lesbians, the trans, the LGBT crowd, they are not the ones that have redefined marriage in the United States. They are not the ones that have destroyed marriage in the United States. It was the heterosexuals. It was us. It was us heterosexuals who ruined marriage. And it all started with Griswold versus Connecticut, because essentially, the essential function of marriage, it's not the only function, it's not the exclusive function, but it is the primary function from a natural law perspective, from a biblical perspective, okay? From the Judeo-Christian biblical perspective, the primary function of marriage, as it was ordained by God in the beginning, going all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, was that a man and a woman be fruitful and that they multiply. Because without marriage, without that basic building block of society, there would be no society. That's the only thing that can grow a society. You want to know what the garden is, where you have to go to plant future taxpayers if you're a government? Where do you go to grow your future taxpayers? In the garden of marriage. That's how new lives are born. That's how new Americans are born. That's how new members of society are born. So when Griswold versus Connecticut came along, it untwisted the primary function of marriage. When I say untwist, there are two essential components to the sexual act within marriage. It's what the Catholic Church calls the unitive and the procreative. That is the purpose of sex between one man and one woman that come together in a sacramental marriage. Is union with one another, and a union that leads to fruit, a union that leads to new human beings, to new children. True love is fruitful. It is. Love multiplies itself. Love gives of itself. Love duplicates itself. Selfishness does the opposite of all of those things. So when that essential function of marriage, again, I got to be careful with my words, the essential function, not the only function, the primary function, not the exclusive function, okay? The point of marriage is not only to have kids, because what does that say to people that are infertile? There's men that aren't able to produce children. There's women who have issues with their organs that are not able to get pregnant. There's older couples who get married, neither of which are fertile. That doesn't mean those are second-class marriages or that they're not even valid marriages in the eyes of God. They're completely valid marriages. But one of the essential functions of a marriage is kids. Now, once you untwist the unitive from the procreative, once you separate those two essential functions of the conjugal act, once you divorce sex from babies, what ends up happening is you have completely redefined what marriage is. You've completely redefined it. That happened in American culture, at least. That happened in the mid to late 60s with the Griswold versus Connecticut ruling. Because the court system came along and said, you know what? The essential function of marriage is no longer children. You can practice birth control. You can contracept. You're basically married girlfriends and boyfriends who don't have to have kids. Marriage is nothing more than a way to just make your kissing legal. What Griswold versus Connecticut did is it reduced marriage from a Judeo-Christian bedrock of society to an adolescent institution. Because an adolescent way to look at love is, I want somebody that I can legally, like I said, I want to be able to make my kissing legal. It's all about love, love, love. It's all about sex, sex, sex. It's all about companionship. And it's all about little else except those things. Now, I'm not saying those things are not important. Of course they're important. That's one of the joys and rewards of marriage. But once you remove children from that equation, it's only a matter of time before society destroys that marriage. So here's what happened. Marriage was redefined in the 1960s. Sex and babies were separated. That court case, Griswold versus Connecticut, initiated what I call the Great Divorce. The Great Divorce between the unitive and the procreative. The Great Divorce between sex and babies. Now, it isolated sex as a selfish act in the eyes of those who do it. Sex became purely recreational rather than being procreational. So once sex was reduced to from a procreational activity to a recreational activity, a purely recreational activity, because I'm not even saying that procreational sex is not recreational. Of course it is. God attached pleasure to it to incentivize us to do it so that we don't go extinct. If it was painful to have sex, we would be extinct. The human race wouldn't have lasted one generation. So of course God attached that pleasure to it. As a matter of fact, the pleasure in it was God's idea. He is the author of the pleasurability of sex. Because as Catholic moral teaching says, God is the author both of nature and of grace. He's the author of both. It's important to keep that in mind when we talk about marriage. Marriage was God's idea. The pleasure of sex was God's idea. Babies was God's idea. It all came from God. And what God has joined, let no man put asunder, Jesus said in Matthew 19. But unfortunately, man put it asunder in the late 60s. Are you really surprised that 5 years later, abortion was legalized? Because if you think about it, abortion is a symptom of a contraceptive mentality. Abortion is the offspring of contraception. Why? Because to the contraceptive mind, whether it's hormonal contraception of birth control pills, whether it's the withdrawal methods, right, pulling out, coitus interruptus, whether it's what I call the mutilated versions of contraception, where you mutilate yourself. For a man, he mutilates himself when he gets a vasectomy. For a woman, she mutilates herself when she gets her tubes tied, when she gets a tubal ligation. That's a form of self-mutilation. And it's a degrading thing to do to yourself, because if you're a man who, quote unquote, gets yourself snipped, if you're a woman who turns your organs into a pretzel and ties up all your tubes, you are putting yourself in the same category as brute beasts who lack the use of reason. You are putting yourself in the same category as dogs who are in heat. What do you do when you have a dog who's in heat? What do you do to a dog who can't control himself? You make up his doggy mind to control himself for him. You take him to the vet and you get him snipped. Why? Because dogs lack the use of reason to practice virtue. They lack the use of reason to practice chastity. They are driven purely by their animal instincts to reproduce and to eat. Us human beings are called to a higher level of living than that because we were endowed with the use of reason, which is the essence of what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God, is to have the use of reason. We are the one species of creation that is able to say, I ought, or I should not. That's one thing we do not have in common with the animals. Yes, we have animal instincts. Yes, we have base drives similar to the animals to eat and to reproduce and to sleep and to defend ourselves when under attack. Of course, we share those drives in common, but that's where the common stops. That's where the similarities stop. So once you separate sex from babies, the contraceptive mind takes over and it starts to see pregnancy as something that went wrong. It starts to see pregnancy as something that is unnatural. Pregnancy is nature taking its course. I hate to sound so basic and take you back to 5th grade sex education, but when a man and a woman have sex and a baby is the result of that, that's nature taking its course. That means that something went wrong, not that something went right. Or actually, I got that reversed. When a pregnancy occurs, that means that something went right, not that something went wrong. But when the contraceptive mind kicks in, it says, my wife got pregnant, my girlfriend got pregnant, my whoever got pregnant. Something went wrong. The contraception didn't work. The birth control didn't work. The barrier method didn't work. There should never be a barrier. That defeats the whole purpose of the sexual act when you put up barriers. The sexual act is not supposed to have barriers. It's not. It's supposed to be a complete union of mind, bodies, and wills. Contraception destroys that. And contraception treats pregnancy as something that goes wrong that needs to be remedied. So when something goes wrong, what do? When something is wrong with your body, what do? You go to the doctors. So when an unplanned or unwanted pregnancy occurs, they take a trip to the doctor. They take a trip to the abortion doctor. They take a trip to the doctor that can dispense more effective pills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is how marriage was redefined. That's right, Sharetta. Babies are a blessing. That's right. There are so many scripture verses that talk about the blessings of children. Genesis 1:26 through 27, Psalm 127:1, Genesis chapter 38. There are so many verses that talk about children and offspring and how important and how much of a blessing they are. So I argue that it was not the homosexuals, it was not the LGBT community that redefined and destroyed marriage. It was the heterosexuals. It was us that ruined it. Because here's what the homosexuals said, and they've been saying this for decades. They said, you know what? Marriage, I should be able to love whoever I want. Love is love. You ever hear that phrase? You notice how marriage is reduced purely to love. There's no reference to children. There's no reference to what the catechism calls the fecundity of marriage. I know that's a $10 word, but basically marriage is supposed to be fruitful. It's supposed to produce offspring. When you take it out of that original natural law context and turn it purely into loving somebody, having somebody there to give you a back rub, having a companion, having somebody, like I said, who you can make your kissing legal with, once you take children out of the picture, you have already redefined marriage in your own mind and in your own heart. Well, for 50 plus years, for more than a half a century, us heterosexuals have been tearing down marriage. Us heterosexuals are the ones who invented the 50% divorce rate. Us heterosexuals are the one who brought about the abortion epidemic that led to 60 million dead babies since 1973. It was us. It was not the rainbow crowd. It was not the LGBTQ crowd. You know what they were doing? They were standing by, watching us. That's what they were doing. That whole time, That whole half-plus century, when us heterosexuals were redefining marriage, chucking dead babies in dumpsters, feminism going crazy, divorce rates going through the roof, when we were doing all that, the LGBT people were standing by and they were saying, well, what about us? The heterosexuals were able to redefine marriage. The heterosexuals were able to exclude children being the primary function of marriage. What about us? When's it going to be our turn to get our shot at marriage? Because if marriage is no longer, if the fundamental purpose of marriage is no longer children, then it's open to anything. It's all game. All is fair in love and war now. That means you can make marriage to be whatever you want it to be. And that is exactly what has happened. As soon as Griswold versus Connecticut came around and paved the way for Roe versus Wade, paved the way for Obergefell versus Burgess in 2015, once that landmark court case happened, it set off a wildfire of consequences. And that's what we're living in right now. So that's the setup. Getting back to us blaming LGBT. Before you go blaming the gays for the breakdown of society, make sure you blame yourself if you had a part in that. If you contributed to the divorce culture, if you contributed to the contraceptive culture, if you've contributed to the culture of death and abortion, make sure you blame yourself first, because they learned that from us. They got the idea from us. Now, it's time for me to start dropping some F-bombs. It is time for your man, Bobby Hesley, to drop an F-bomb. Are you ready for me to drop an F-bomb? Before I do that, please like this video. Please comment on it. Please share it, because people need to see this. Pardon the sweat. I'm out walking, and it's a summer here in Michigan because it's in the mid-50s. You guys ready for the F-bombs? I also blame feminism for everything that we see going on right now. I blame feminism. Why? Well, what has always been the battle cry of feminism? What has always been, my man, Paul Thomas, I'm a bigot. I love you too, Paul. Rudy, thank you, sir. Feminism, I'm coming for you. You are to blame for the breakdown of marriage. You are to blame for all this stuff that we see in the headlines recently. If there's somebody to blame, it is feminists. And let me tell you why. Because the battle cry of the feminist movement has been to blur the lines between the genders. The main sacrament of feminism, other than being abortion, is to tear down gender relations. The most anti-gender movement in the country is not the LGBT movement. Stop blaming them. Stop gaslighting them. I'm not saying I support or agree with that lifestyle. Don't twist it. You guys need to stop scapegoating the LGBTs. You need to start scapegoating the feminists, because they are the ones who started questioning gender. They are the ones who started saying, who constructed this nonsense that quote unquote gender is a social construct. That wasn't the trans people saying that stuff. That wasn't the LGBT saying all that. And if they are saying it, they heard it and learned it from the feminists. Because the whole point of feminism is to turn feminine, sweet, childbearing women into masculine, overbearing, insuffering, disagreeable dudes. That was the point of feminism, to turn women into men, and to turn men who should be masculine, who should be leaders, who should be alphas, all these other descriptors we want to use of the male gender. The goal was to turn them into women, to turn them into approval-seeking, soft, beta soy boys, to emasculate them. That was the point of feminism. It was to take the collective testicles of men, tear them off, and put them in the purse of the evil matriarchy, and to keep them there, turning women into men and men into women, and they have succeeded. So can you blame the trans community for wanting to blur the lines of gender, when we've been living in the culture for the last 60 years that has been doing its damnedest to start a gender war in the name of feminism and women's liberation? That is a fact, folks. So the next time you read an article of a biological male winning a female beauty pageant, the next time you see an article of a biological male beating up biological females inside of the MMA octagon, don't get mad at the trans, don't get mad at the LGBT people, get mad at the liberal, feminist, heterosexuals. They are to blame. And that's exactly right, Ed. That's what we've been hearing for the last 60 years, that gender roles are a social construct. So what do you expect then? If you have been indoctrinating young people in academia, because let's face it, folks, women's study classes have ruined gender relations. Whenever somebody goes to college, whether it's a man or a woman, but mostly women, they have to go through these stupid, idiotic, anti-male women's studies classes. And what is beat into their head year after year after year, semester after semester after semester on your average college campus, when you go to your average women's study class, what is pounded into the heads of these young women? That gender is a social construct, right? That there is no difference between men and women, that gender doesn't matter. If you're a woman, you are engaging in old world thinking. You're in a 1950s time machine. If you would rather be at home, loving and caring for your family, than getting shot at out on the battlefield in Afghanistan. A true woman should be willing to sign up into the army and get shot at by terrorists. That's what a real woman is. A real woman is somebody who can become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. That's a real woman. Well, let me tell you, folks, all the women who achieve those things, not all, but a vast majority of them are alone. They can't find a man, and they are miserable. You know why? Because those are male pursuits. I don't care what anybody says. We are still living in a man's world. I don't care what year it is. I don't care if it's 2021. 2021 is a man's world. You know why? Because if you're a woman and you want to become a CEO, you want to become a world champion MMA fighter, you want to kick butt in the military, you want to do all these other things that your women's study classes tells you should be doing instead of the traditional roles of a woman, you have to have masculine qualities in order to get to the top of those things, because you cannot get anywhere in this world being a sweet, humble, docile little kitten. If you want to climb that corporate ladder, you got to be competitive. You got to be a bulldog. You got to be disagreeable. You have to have masculine qualities in order to get to the top of the workforce, or you ain't going to get there. You ain't going to get past being a secretary or somebody answering the phones. If you want to go from the front desk to the CEO suite, you got to be a man. You got to have traditionally masculine qualities to get there, period. Ask any woman in the workforce and they will tell you that. You have to learn how to be disagreeable. You have to learn how to be competitive. You have to learn how to be anti. You have to learn how to push back. You have to learn how to be strong-willed. You have to learn how to insist that your way of doing things be done instead of someone else's ways being done. And those are things, while they might make you an incredible female judge, while they might make you an incredible female pilot in the U.S. Air Force, all those things, all these career achievements that you would have to have all these masculine qualities to pull off, while they would make you incredible at all those things, you know one thing that they will make you horrible at? Being a wife. All those things that would make you an incredible 21st century woman would make you a terrible, insufferable wife. And that's why many women, not all, because I'm not going to generalize, but a vast majority of women that eat the playbook, a vast majority of women that do everything that they are told to do in their women's studies classes in this feminist culture, they are alone right now. They are. They are not traditional women, and because of that, they cannot find a traditional man. Now, there are exceptions to every rule. I get that. But I'm talking about the way human nature works. That's how things work, folks. I told you this would be a polarizing video, and I told you that I have a polarizing opinion. But the fact is, if you guys want to read my post that I made, it was a written post. I think I made it yesterday. I want you to think about something. In setting out to liberate women, feminism, I believe, has destroyed women. I believe that women were much happier off in days gone by, in the bygone eras, the golden eras of the Beaver Cleaver era, right? They were. Think about it. They weren't abusing alcohol back then. They weren't having all the issues that women of today are having right now. Being past certain ages where they're not married with kids, being unhappy about it, being depressed about it, being saddled in hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt that they don't have a shot at paying off. It was not like that for women in the past. They were happier. And I believe the happier you are, the freer you are. I do. So I want you guys to think about something. Going back to contraception, going back to Griswold versus Connecticut. Who did birth control really liberate? Men or women? I argue that it liberated men. You know why? Because if you think of everything that a woman has to go through to be on birth control, hormonal birth control, which is the most popular form of it, think of all the side effects she has to deal with. She has to have her endocrine system messed up. She has to deal with the depression that comes from it, weight gain that comes from it, predisposition to breast cancer. She is more likely to have miscarriages if she uses the birth control pill. Why? Because it has been proven to weaken and prematurely age the uterus. It does. It drives her libido down. If you think about it, the birth control pill was designed to be anti-baby. That's why it's called contraception. It's Latin for against life, against conception. The word contra in Latin means against. It is a pill that programs a woman's body to do the polar opposite of what it was designed to do, which is to harbor and bear life. Again, that's not the only thing the female body was designed to do. I don't want to be reductionist about it. I don't want to reduce women down to baby making machines, because that's swinging to the other direction, right? We don't want the pro-contraception people reducing women to sex objects, because that's what they do, because contraception does turn a woman into a sex object. It does. But we also don't want the anti-contraception people to reduce a woman down to a baby-making machine, because she's a human being, whether it's on either side. Virtue observes the golden mean, St. Thomas Aquinas says. All virtue lies in the middle, between a vice of excess or a vice of deficiency. We want to avoid either extreme. God falls in the middle. Okay? So, the pill does all those things to a woman's body, and all the guy has to do, show up, collect the sexual pleasure, put his underwear back on, and he can bounce after that. He doesn't have to deal with anything. He shows up, does his thing, and leaves. A woman is left with all the other burdens and all the other side effects that come from that. So who's the free one? Huh? Who's the one who's liberated in that situation? To me, it sounds like the men. It does. How about abortion? Oh, that's the sacrament of the F-bomb. Feminism stands or falls on abortion. But who has that really set free? I've dated post-abortive women. I did. I dated a woman in my past who had an abortion. And I believe God put me in her life to heal her from that. We ended up going to the abortion clinic that she had her abortion at. I took her there, and we prayed the rosary outside of the abortion clinic where she had her abortion. That was incredibly healing for her. But she had been depressed for years. She had been suicidal. Every Mother's Day, she would feel doom and gloom and feelings of suicide, because she knows that that was a child. She knows that that was not a clump of cells. She knows that it was not a fetus. She knows that it was not a parasite. She knows that that was her child. Now the guy, he showed up, had his pleasure, did his piece, he was gone. Who's the free one in that situation, huh? The man or the woman? Damn sure ain't the child. How can you be free when you've been torn limb from limb with metal torture instruments in your mother's womb? And that's what abortion has done. It has turned a birth canal into a death trap. It has turned a place of life where life is supposed to begin into a place of death. That's another thing that feminism has ruined for women. It has not set them free. We have a $10+ billion a year pornography industry that would not be able to exist without contraception and abortion. Think about that. Guys, can you believe that there was a point in time, and it was not that long ago, a half a century is not that long ago, where a man used to have to marry a woman in order to have sex with her. There was a time in our society prior to Griswold versus Connecticut, 5 or 8 years before Roe versus Wade, there was a time when the price tag to have sexual relations with a woman was a lifetime commitment of exclusivity to that one woman. Why? Because she could get pregnant if you have sex with her. And if she gets pregnant, that child needs a mother and a father to care for it, because that's what's best for that child. And it was also shunned by society, which is a society I respect. It was looked down by society for a child to be born out of wedlock. And it should be looked down on because it's not ideal for the child. Just like somebody would look down on a guy who's 45 years old, living in his mom's basement, playing PS5 with a 550 credit score and a job at Taco Bell. Dang right, society should look down on that. In the same way, society used to look down on people who had children out of wedlock. Why? Because marriage was still an honorable thing at that time. Marriage was still a sacred institution, because the basis of that institution was its ancient basis of unitive and procreative love. Marriage was ruined by feminism. I just talked about all the women who are into the workforce now. The majority of student loan debt is carried by women. They have debts that they are a high probability they're never going to pay off. Why do you think it's so popular that guys like Joe Biden run around pledging to cancel student debt and everybody gets behind it? That shows you how useful a college degree is, by the way. How come they don't cancel business loans? Huh? How come they don't cancel business lines of credit? How come there's no government programs to cancel credit cards that are used to build businesses? Because they're valuable. But anytime you can just punt on a debt, how valuable is that debt really? We always hear about big oil and big pharma and big this and big that. We never hear about big education. That's one of the biggest rackets and scams running in this country, is the college system, which, by the way, is one of the central indoctrination systems for feminism. So I said all that to say, I went on that long tirade to say all this, that the end game of feminism has come home to roost in the United States of America, and it's called the Equality Act. That is the end game of feminism, folks, to turn women into men and men into women, literally. Literally. That is what's going on right now. Now, of course, I say that tongue in cheek. Of course, a man is a man and a woman is a woman. I get that. Let's not nitpick on semantics. But what I'm saying is, feminism has not only been one of the deadliest movements in American culture, but I argue in human history. What other movement can you think of other than Mao Zedong killing 60 million of his own people in the communist Great Leap Forward in China? In a period of 3 years, Chairman Mao Zedong killed 60 million of his own Chinese people. He starved them with a famine. The only other movement I can think of that mass murdered 60 million innocent people, that mass murdered 60 million of its own innocent citizens, is abortion. And who's behind abortion? That big fat F word, feminism. Who's behind the trans movement? Who's behind LGBT? Who's behind all that stuff? I argue it's feminists. That's who's behind it. These anti-gender, war between the sexes, communists are behind it. And it has come to America, folks, and it's here for us to deal with. So, you guys haven't heard from me in a while, so I wanted to make it up to you. The few times you do hear from me, boy, are you going to hear from me. And I hope I accomplished that today. I know I did, Paul. I know I just insulted 50%, over 50% of American 40-somethings. But that doesn't mean that what I said isn't true. It doesn't matter how I said it. It doesn't matter what my tone was. It doesn't matter why I said it. What matters is if I said it, is it true? Is it true or false? What would be insulting is if it were false, if it were a lie. I might be insulting over 50% of 40-something Americans, but at least I'm not lying to them. And if somebody's insulted by that, maybe they should do some self-inventory. Maybe they should question whether or not they have been deceived, whether it's their upbringing, whether it was their educational career. Maybe they have been fed a bill of goods that is untrue, because I believe that it is. Because like I've always said, at the heart of all identity politics, we call it a culture war that we're in. What I believe we're in the midst of, folks, is an identity war. And the grand wizard of Oz behind all identity wars, whether it's black versus white, whether it's gay versus straight, whether it's men versus women, whether it's cops versus civilians, whether it's rich versus poor, whether it's immigrants versus natives, what's behind all those identity wars? The big fat C word, communism. That's what's behind it all, folks. That's what's behind it all. And I love Ed. As a Floridian, I feel offended when you said mid-50s this summer. You're dead wrong on that. Well, welcome to Michigan. There's people out barbecuing right now. There's people wearing shorts and sandals right now, even though it's 55 degrees. I love our country, folks. I love everybody in our country. I love all demographics of citizens in our country. I do. I love conservatives. I love liberals, Democrats, Republicans. I love the LGBT people. I love the heterosexual people. I love us all, folks. I want what's best for all of us. And I think what makes us happiest is when we live out God's plan for marriage and family, if we are called to that life. Some of us might be called to serve God in a more consecrated single celibate way, a small percentage of the population. But the vast majority, I would say 99% of the population, is called to marriage and children and family. And I believe that that's what makes us happiest. I believe that we are all stronger together than we are apart. I believe that from the bottom of my heart. That rhymed pretty good. Love you too, Sandra. I know it's hard to talk about, Wendy. It's very hard to talk about, but somebody's got to do it. And your man, Bobby Hesley, is here for duty. I love us all, guys. There's an old saying that those who defy church teaching realize its truth. They realize it's contrary in the hurt of their wounds. I want you to think about that. When people spurn the Judeo-Christian biblical plan for marriage, when people make fun of that and say, oh, sex outside of marriage, who cares about that anymore? You're stuck in the 1950s. Times have changed. When you live contrary to that, if you want to see proof of the truth of those beautiful teachings of chastity, all you have to do is look at the wounds of the people who live contrary to it. That is how you can verify the truth. And in my case, specifically of Catholic teaching, because the Catholic Church is the only Christian community that speaks out against artificial birth control. And as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why most Catholics leave the Catholic Church, is over that specific teaching of artificial contraception. They can't handle it. They don't like it. They want to be able to use their spouse. They don't believe that every sexual act between a husband and a wife should leave open the possibility for the transmission of new life. There's me rhyming again. I ain't trying. I keep rhyming and I'm not trying to. But that's a fact, guys. The unitive and the procreative must be joined at all times, because once you untwist those two realities of marriage, you will end up with a 50% divorce rate that is no longer 50%. Why? It ain't because divorce rates have plummeted. It's because marriage rates have plummeted. The reason the divorce rate has gone down in the United States, not because less people are getting divorced. It's because less people are getting married in the first place. Because now, back in the day, if a man wanted to marry a woman, you know what he used to do? He used to buy a wedding ring. He used to get down on one knee and he would say, Mary Jane, will you marry me? You know what men of today do? You know what the modern day proposal is of the 21st century? Here's how a guy proposes to a chick nowadays. He gets down on one knee and he says, Mary Jane, will you move in with me? That's the new proposal nowadays. That's the secular way. I believe that cohabitation is a secular mockery of marriage. It is fruitless, it is childless, and ultimately it ends up leading to broken hearts, broken relationships, and broken families. Nobody can argue against millions of years of human evolution. Marriage is the bedrock of humanity. Since the dawn of humanity, it's been an institution that was ordained by Almighty God himself. And it's time for us as a society to return back to that sacred institution. But in the meantime, I need everybody to stop blaming the LGBT community for things that we heterosexuals are responsible for destroying. That's all I have to say. I want everybody to like and share this video, comment on it. It's not going to be one of my more popular videos, but it is true nonetheless. So I hope you guys in Michigan get out and enjoy this awesome sunny weather on Saturday. And I will see you guys on the next video. Peace.